Okay, so I learn 180 Daf instead of 365. Okay. What are we holding? Holding at a Mishnah on the bottom of Pei Zion, I think, right? 87a.
Oh.
I was busy with my kids and my students. So okay. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. And this was by learning we should have the base of Mikdash. And we're learning Luli Nishmas to have a Golda Bas Baruch Binyamin. And the Sanas have been Seeing. And for Shleima for David Ben Sarah. Just looking over here. Sivan Chaf Aleph. About the end of the school year is when we finish Basra, but Metzia. Start Basra. About a month left. Also, we're coming to 6 years of the 530 Warriors, which is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, 6 years. Okay, so the Mishnah begins. Ve'ilu oichlin min haTorah. Talking about workers. What we were talking about before is workers, their obligation, what time they need to come in the morning and at night. We also spoke about what you have to feed them. We said it was dependent on custom. And now we say that while a person's working, you should be allowed to take from the produce that he's working with to be able to eat that produce. But not everyone is allowed to do that. So it says like this: the only people that are allowed to eat from, like you're picking strawberries, someone that's working with food that's attached to the ground, at the time when it's the finished product. So at that time, you should be allowed to eat it. So picking strawberries, you should be allowed to eat strawberries while you're picking them. And, some of them you put into the basket, that green basket that they give you. And some of them you eat.
Is this from the pasuk from before about a worker who's allowed to eat produce?
Yeah, I'm going to need a chumash. You see that? Is
that from Mishpatim?
It's in Dvarim, actually. So
I remember learning about it.
When you go strawberry picking, you come back with that basket and you have to pay for it at the front. Are you allowed to eat while you're picking? Or do you have to pay for everything? See, this is a little different. This is a hired worker that's getting paid for his time. He's allowed to put some things into his mouth. He's not. Right. He's not. The guy that's picking strawberries is not getting paid for his time. He's just going to buy the strawberries.
No, when you go picking, I don't think
you're allowed to eat.
Unless there's like people at the grocery store.
Yeah, but it's already measured. In the grocery store is fine. Yeah, because they sell you a box of strawberries. You could eat 2 or 3 on the way to the register, but you still pay for the box. Right. When you're picking,
no, but not if it's by weight. No, but some things in the grocery store are by weight. The grapes are by weight.
Yeah,
I see people eating grapes in the store.
But the grapes sometimes it's like a bag. Right. By the cluster. Remember the trick?
But there's a weight on the bag. They weigh it when you get to the register.
Something. Remember they had the discussion like sometimes they trick you to put it by weight, sometimes they put it by
they do that. Okay. The first thing is b'shas kamar malacha, it's at the time of when it's ready to eat. But if it's separated from the ground already, then you have a second condition that you need. It needs to be not ready for meiser. Once it's a nigma malachta, once it's a finished product, then it's chayav and meiser. You can't eat until you take meiser. So I'm not sure if the Mishnah is telling me a meiser law, or if the Mishnah is telling me a monetary law. I believe it's telling me a monetary law, which is dependent on a meiser law. right? Monetary law is you have no right to eat that if you eat it because it's chayv and meiser. Monetary not because it's chayv and meiser. You have no right to eat it because between you and the owner, that wasn't the arrangement that you're going to be eating that produce. And then and when do we determine which yes, which no? Chayv and meiser determines that.
Not about to eat because they haven't fixed it yet.
Right. It's all of this is talking about when it's growing from the ground. The following are things that you're not allowed to eat. If you're working with things but it's not the finished product, but it's not ripe. You're weeding, you're not picking. If you're weeding, then you're not allowed to eat the produce that's growing. Things that are separated from the ground already, what restrictions do you have there? That's that's like the opposite of what we said before, is once it's a finished product, then you're not allowed to eat.
Weeding is not separating the grain from the ground, you're just kind of harvesting the grain.
Weeding would be you're pulling weeds out, and you're doing other work that's not the finished, not the finished product. Or if you're working with things that don't grow from the ground, you're I don't know, but you're milking animals, making cheese. She says, for example.
Here from the ground, both bushes and trees.
Yeah. Where do we know this from? Okay, so let's take a look at the verses.
There's one that says 23.
23, 5. Okay. 2 verses at the end in Parshas Kiseitze, in the middle of Parshas Kiseitze. When you come to work during the harvest season, that's in parentheses, in your fellow's vineyard, you may eat as many grapes as you desire until you are satisfied, but you may not put any into your container. It means you can't take it home. You don't have to eat while you're there. When you come to work in your fellow's field of standing grain, you may pluck ears with your hand to eat them, but you may not lift a sickle on your fellow's standing grain. So take it for yourself. The word for sickle is chermesh. Standing grain is called kama. Okay, let's take a look at the psukim now. Starts off, where do we know that you're allowed to eat while you're working? Minani mili, it says in the pasuk, will come to your friend's vineyard and you will eat. Talking about a worker. Ashkachan Karen, we find the vineyard. Kol mili minalan. How do you know you're allowed to eat everything else besides for grapes? Say strawberries or something else. Well, Gamrin and Mikaran, we can learn that from the vineyard. Makaram yochad davar shegedule karka b'shas kamar malacha payalecha. By of kol davar shegedule karka b'shas kamar malacha payalecha by. Just like a vineyard, what's significant about a vineyard? That it's grows from the ground, and you're picking the grapes at the end. So too, anything else that grows from the ground and you're picking it at the end of it when it's ripe, you're allowed to eat. Right? It's called a binyanav. We learned from a precedent.
The statement before.
Binyanav is I find precedent and then I compare everything else to that. Very simple. Binyanav or mamatzino. Well, the Gemara says a precedent needs to be comparable. Mala kerem, whereas for kerem, shekin chayiv ba'ulas. When it comes to a vineyard, there's certain types of clusters that you have to leave for the poor. You may think that just like you have to, in a vineyard, it's more strict, you have to leave certain things for the poor. You may think that you also have to leave certain things for the worker. Special halachas by the vineyard, but you have to leave for the poor, you have to leave for the worker. So maybe a vineyard is unique where a vineyard you're allowed to eat because it has special halachas, but maybe everything else you don't have to. Well, the Gemara says, Gamrin and Mikama. We're going to learn from standing grain. The Gemara says, Kama gufei minalan. Where do we know that standing grain? You're allowed to eat while you're working. We're going to learn from standing grain that everything else as well, you're allowed to eat while you're working. Yeah, around 87b. So it says, where does it say about standing grain you're allowed to eat? When you pick ears of corn, ears of wheat, in your hand, you're allowed to eat it. Okay, that's the verse right after the one that we read before. 1 second. We know when it comes to standing grain that when you make it into dough, you have to separate challah and give it to the Kohen. So you may think that just like you have to give challah to the Kohen, you also have to give to your workers. But other things like strawberries or blueberries or whatever else, apples, maybe you don't have to give to the you don't have to take challah. You don't have to leave deformed apples for the poor. So maybe you're not allowed to eat it. The Gemara says, who made you understand? What convinced you that when it says standing grain, it's talking about standing grain that's chayav and challah? Maybe it's anything that's standing, including legumes, which are standing also. I thought they grow on the floor like melons, but apparently they stand. What do beans look like when they grow?
They're bush beans. There are beans that climb. They're always in the air. Are they standing? Is that the question?
Yeah. Do they grow like grass?
They're bushes.
Grow like bushes? Really? With a hard stem? No, it can't be. They must be planted every year.
Beans, and also there's a bean that they climb. Beans, not peas. Any kind of bean. And it's just legumes, right?
Yeah.
There are beans that grow like a stem, and they have leaves, but they're
not as tall.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess it's still considered standing.
It was Jack and the Beanstalk, right? So that's a vine that grow around something. Grew up a coconut.
Oh, is that when in Jack and the Beanstalk it was growing around something?
It was
growing straight up.
Straight up.
That's the chiddush of it.
This challah that's separated for the
Kohen, yeah.
The only one that exists.
What do you mean?
Like that is separated from the reach.
No, just only for the 5 grains. That's what we're saying here. Challah is only separated by the 5 grains. Let's say you're growing other things that aren't the 5 grains. Would you have to take? Would you have to allow the worker to eat from it? Because it says kama. So it says, well, kama maybe means other things that aren't the grain. Kama doesn't necessarily mean wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. You know, it could mean.
So they're abundant to separate food that wasn't.
Yeah, that's from Meiser. That's
Oh.
Meiser. You're right. That's
For the
Meiser. Here we're talking about challah. Yeah. Okay. So how do we know that kama means grain? So the Gemara says, Asya kama kama. We're going to use a new a new way of learning. So far, we've been working with the binyanav, which is called the mamatzino, a precedent. Find over here, we'll apply it to everything else. That's similar. So the Gemara says, okay, now we're a little bit stuck. How do we know that that kama is referring to the grain? So we say, well, we'll use now a gezerah shava. Asya kama kama. Gezerah shava means that we find in one place the word, we find it in another place. We're going to use what it meant over there to mean over here. From contextual, from some other context is going to. Over here it says when you come to your friend standing grain to do work. And over there it says talking about the Aimer. When you start to use the sickle on the grain, then you start to count the 7 weeks. Just like over there we're referring to grain, to the 5 grains. So to over here we're referring to the 5 grains. That's chayav and challah. Okay, so basically we have no source for picking apples or strawberries or anything else that the worker is allowed to eat. We only have 2 things that they're allowed to do, and that's if they're in a vineyard, and which is unique because it has deformed clusters have to be given to the poor, and we know that grain as well they're allowed to eat, and that's unique because it's chayiv and challah. How do we know everything else? The Gemara says, ikla mifrach. We can ask a question on this. One second. We don't have a source for everything else. Kama is chayiv and chala. That's why you have to, the standing grain is chayiv and is obligated to separate the chala for the kohen. That's why the worker is allowed to eat. So it says, well, karim yechiach. We'll prove it from the vineyard, which does not have chala. You don't have to give from the grapes to the kohen. So it says, well, malakarim shken chai bailas, but you have to give the deformed clusters to the poor. Well, kamatichiach, but you don't have to give the deformed clusters of grain to the poor. So it's obviously that's not the common factor here. It must be the common factor. Must be v'chazar adin. So we go back and forth around this, and it says leirizeh karizeh. The strength of this one is not the strength of that one. However, it's tzad shava, but the common factor that we do have. Both of them grow from the ground. That's a common factor. And both of them, when it's the finished product, the worker is allowed to eat from it. We'll apply that to everything else. So what we did right now is we went from a binyanav, which is a precedent, to using a tzad shava, which is which is a precedent using more than one item. Binyanav is when there's one. Tzad shava is when you have two or more. So now we have a tzad shava as a precedent. It's the common factor of two things. Okay. Okay, this Gemara, this style of Gemara, and actually it's very similar to this, we find in a lot of places. It's a classic Gemara. We had it in Brachos. It's in a few places. This. 1 second. When I look at those two things, the grapes, the vineyard, and the standing grain, both of them, the common factor, the commonality is that they both are used on the altar. Wine is poured on the altar, and the flour is used in sacrifices. So Vasanami Zayas, the only thing I'll be able to learn from that is olives, this Bitzad Mizbeach, because they both have all three of them have this common factor, that they're used on the altar. So it'd say that just like these are used on the altar, the worker's allowed to eat from them. So to anything and what else is there that's used on the altar? The only thing that would be used is the olives, which is not said specifically. The Gemara says, "V'zayis ma'atzadasi." That's what you're going to do. You're going to take the olive and you're going to use it from this common factor. And that's what the whole common factor is just going to teach me the olive. He who gufei kerem ikri. I don't even need the common factor to teach me, because it says when you go into your friend's vineyard, it doesn't actually mean vineyard. That was a translation. Kerem could also mean an olive grove.
Oh.
So it actually says in the verse olive grove, because it says kerem, which could be translated as an olive grove. Now, which would now tell me that I'm not learning anything from the tzad shava. By the grape, they use the wine instead of the grape. By the standing grain, they use the flour and not the yeah. So it says the ksiv, we have even a verse. The ksiv vayivar migadesh vad kama vad kem zayas, and it destroyed from the piled grain, the standing grain, and even the olive groves. I think this is when Shimshon lit the fox's tails on fire and set them wild through the Plishtim farms. It burnt everything. Amar of Papa. So you see, it says Kerem Zayas, olive groves. Amar of Papa says no. You're stretching it. It says Kerem Zayas Ikri. If olive grove could be called Kerem, but it's called Kerem Zayas, you have to add the word Zayas. You need the modifier for it to become olive grove. Otherwise, Kerem Stama, but if it just says Kerem, the word Kerem, plain Layakri, that's not called an olive grove. That would just be a vineyard. So since in the verse it says Kerem, doesn't say Kerem Zayas, so it's only referring to a vineyard. So therefore, when we have a tzad shava, the common factor between the vineyard and the standing grain, that would come to include the olive. Okay? So it's including the olive. The Gemara says, Mikol makam kasha. But now we're back to the question, how do you know apples and strawberries and everything else that the worker is working, how do you know that he's allowed to eat? Alam Shmuel, Shmuel says, Amakra, we learn from the pasuk, the chermesh says the sickle. The rabbis call bali chermesh to include anything that's a sickle is used on. Okay, so now anything that the sickle is used is going to be included in this. I still didn't include the apples and the strawberries. Don't use a sickle on that. Let's see. V'hai chermesh mi boile b'shas chermesh. 1 second. We have another sort. We use this chermesh, the sickle, to teach me something else. That when you're allowed to eat, that's only if it's a time when the sickle is being used, which means in the harvest season. And the time of the harvest season you eat. But you can't eat if it's not the harvest season. You can't just go in and eat the things that aren't even ripe. It says, no, that source that it needs to be the harvest season. That I learned from something else. That I learned from Vel Kali that you can't put into your basket, nafka. That we learn that out, which means I can only put it into the basket of the owner, but not into your private basket. You can put it into they give you a big basket, and you have your own like lunchbox there. Not let it put it into your basket to take it home. Yeah, I was in Homestead. Someone said, "Oh, there's a farm you should go see." And I was looking for. I pulled into some other farm, and there was a lady there picking star fruit, a big basket around her neck, hanging. They're picking they pick like this, and they put it in the basket. They put it down. Anyway, we started talking. So she says, "Yeah, take one." So what do you think? She's a worker. She's a worker. She's allowed to eat, right? But she allowed to give me.
No, maybe we'll find out.
Okay, I ate it, but now that I'm learning this Gemara, I'm not sure. It was actually very good.
Wow.
Okay. Tainach. No, right. Yeah, let's hope.
It's just one.
Right. Right. But when you really get into the nitty gritty, when you know, when you know the halacha as well.
She wanted you to become a customer of the homestead food.
That could be. Tainach the bar chermesh. Okay, so far our answer was that anything that the sickle is used on, that the worker is allowed to eat. But the lav bar chermesh minolan. How do you know other things that aren't that you don't use a sickle? For example, starfruit, or olives, or dates, or apples. Right, you don't use the sickle on that. The sickle is used for standing for stalks. Elam Rabbi Yitzchak is Amakra. We have a pasuk. Kama standing grain. L'Rabbis called balikaim. Anything that's standing. Now, standing over here, it's coming to be more an inclusive term, which means anything that grows, basically. Is that how they put it over there? Anything that grows tall.
I think that produce requires a sickle.
After the sickle.
Does not require a sickle.
Yeah. In the next paragraph, what is
rather,
it?
Yitzchak said that halakha concerning which produce of labor may eat is derived from a different source. There states standing comma.
Right.
The unmodified term comma serves to include any standing produce. Mar asks, why didn't you say earlier that the term standing?
Okay. So 1 second. Now the Gemara says, okay, so we're using any sort of produce. We're learning from Kama. The Gemara says, "V'amrit Kama, Kama de mechayves bechala." He said, Kama was teaching me was grain. Kama, you learned from Gzeir Shava that Kama was compared to the Kama by the Omer, which is chayiv and chala, and it's referring specifically to grain, to the 5 grains. The Gemara says, "Hani mili mikami denesi chermesh." That's what I thought before I introduced the verse that had the sickle in it. Once I introduced the sickle, now I don't need that Gzeir Shava to teach me standing grain, which is chayiv and chala. So therefore, Kama will now teach me anything that grows, any produce.
Are these grains edible in a raw state?
I think if you eat, what was the Mishnah? There was a Brisa in Brachos that says, I think it was Hadama. I think it says if you eat it when it's fresh, I think it's Hadama as a berry before it's dried.
But are these edible when they're fresh? Is wheat edible when it's just picked? I mean, do people eat uncooked wheat?
I'm sorry? No, 1 second. We're talking about the wheat berries. I'm not sure. I know that that corn, like corn on the cob, that you can eat when you first pick it.
Right.
You don't have to cook it. We cook it because when we take it after a few days, you have to cook it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know about the wheat though.
Just because you don't do it doesn't mean it can't be done.
Because if it's food that you eat while you're working in the field,
Right.
make you think though maybe there's a reason about kindness to the people who are doing the work. But if it's something you can't eat till you take it home and cook it anyway.
Right. Well, over here we're learning that you're not allowed to take it home. You can't put it into your basket.
Right. It's only for the worker to eat while he's working.
Yeah.
You can't put it in the pouch and take it home for your family.
Right.
Right.
The Gemara is going to later compare not muzzling the animal while it's threshing, to the worker. You have to allow the worker only this, but there's a difference because this is a positive command on the employer to let your worker eat.
Right.
That's a negative prohibition on the owner of the animal not to muzzle his. So here we have a positive command. Over there, it's a negative. The Gemara is going to ask: is there a negative command on this, and there's a positive command on that? And But meanwhile, we're just working with the positive command to let the worker eat.
It doesn't say he has a solar cooker, so in the field he could cook up the grain and eat it.
The professor is suggesting that he has a little cooker that he's cooking it up in the field.
Well, didn't we learn that people used to take wheat and put it out and let it dry in the sun and then eat that raw, that like that. But that's after it's been in the sun.
I don't know if they would eat it then they would need to toast it, I think.
That's right. It was toasted. That's right. So I'm just wondering trying to understand where we're at. If it's something, if the example is wheat,
it must be.
Wheat can't be eaten raw.
It must be that it can be eaten when it's fresh.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Both can be eaten fresh. Yeah. Okay. Now, Hashta the Asi Chemesh, is probably called the Bar Chemesh. Now that you've introduced the sickle, and we said that anything that the sickle is used on, even if it's not chayiv and chala, which would include like legumes, so kama lamali. So what do we need the word kama for? The rabbis called balikaima to tell me anything that's that grows, any produce. Now that I know those two things, the sickle and any produce.
Right.
So why did I need to have that gzeira shava at the beginning between kerem and kama to go back and forth? What does the gzeira shava teach me? The Gemara says no. The kerem and the kama, that was teaching me the special halachas that apply. As Kedatanya was taught in the Brisa. So there's specifics here. It says kisavai when a person will enter, which is referring to the worker. Nemra kanbia, it says entering v'nemala alon, and it says further on leisavai olav hashemesh that you shouldn't pay him after the sun sets. Malalam b'payil, just like over there, it's referring to a worker. They can't delay his payment. So here, when we say you enter into your friend's field, we're not just talking about entering the field, we're talking about a worker. It's very important, this Gemara, because if you read the verse, it looks like you're actually allowed to go into your friend's field and eat what you want. Right? But here it says, when you come in your fellow's vineyard, you may eat. It doesn't say who. So we have this limud that it's referring to the worker.
Oh.
Very important. Chasing a guy out of your field and he's yelling at you verses in the Torah. And you have to yell back at him the brisa.
But the paya is for any.
It's for the poor.
Person.
Yeah. Bekerem reyacha, it says your friend's field. Ole bekerem kuti, and not in a non-Jew's field. You're only allowed to go into a Jew's field to eat when you're working. But if you're working for a non-Jew, you're not allowed to eat while you're working. Just 1 second. You have a question?
Yes, but if a person has like a field that fenced in, the pail would also be fenced in, or he would leave it.
He has to leave it open.
Yeah, but it could be fenced with just leave the fence open.
Right.
That was the whole thing with the sprinkler. Like you're not allowed, like people are not allowed to
Right.
use anything that they had,
Right.
like not left for the public.
Right.
But they are, so it could be like
They
fenced
open
in,
it,
so
open.
it's open.
Yeah, they open it for the poor. All of this makes sense. Gezel kuti yaser, according to the opinion that says that you're not allowed to steal from a non-Jew. So you're not allowed to steal from him, but if you're a worker, you're allowed to eat from his produce. But according to the opinion that says that you're allowed to steal from a non-Jew, so hashta gzela mutter payil mibai. Do you have kuti or do you have payil? What's in your Gemara? You have kuti? So it's not, it's okay. Tosus asks that no one actually holds that you're allowed to steal from a non-Jew. What is this Gemara referring to? It only says about avoiding paying back a loan. It doesn't say about actually stealing. You have a Gentile, yeah. The original Gemara was Nachri. My Gemara says Kuti. Make sure no one gets angry when it says stealing from a non-Jew is permissible. It actually, so they adjusted it. Nachri means a stranger, a non-Jew. So if you're allowed to steal, so payil mibai, you have to tell me that a worker is allowed to eat. What do you mean? So it says according to that opinion, it's talking about that if you're working in a field of hektish, that you're not allowed to eat. Okay. V'achalta, continuing the expounding on the verse, and you will eat. But you're not allowed to suck the juice out of the grapes and then leave the peels there. He said, because in order to get your satisfaction when you're eating like that, you're going to have too much waste and it's going to be a loss to the owner. This is like just taking the best part of the toppings. You take the toppings off all of the we had in the yeshiva some days they serve shakshuka. So sometimes the bachrim, they don't want the vegetables. They come in. One guy came, he took all the eggs out of the thing and he left the tray over there with just the thing. So it was like, no, that's not how it works. Yeah, they made it a specific way. So here he's just gonna suck the thing and leave all the peels. He's gonna eat the whole thing. If he would be eating the grapes, he would eat much less. Now that he's sucking the juice out, he's gonna eat, there'll be nothing left for the owner. Now it says the grapes. You can't bring along your salad dressing. I don't know what type of salad dressing you use on grapes, maybe some salt or something. You're not allowed to bring a dip to eat it with. You're allowed to eat, but how much grapes can you eat? You eat a handful of grapes. How much can you eat? But no, if you have a dip with it, then you can eat like so much more. That you're not allowed to do. cheese, right? Kinafshecha, to your desire, kinafshel balabayis kach nafshel poil. Like the desire of the owner, so is the desire of the worker. Ma nafshel eichel upater, af nafshel poil eichel upater. Just like if the owner would be eating, he would be exempt from taking meiser. So too, when the worker eats, it's not considered like a sale, because there's a new halachas that are applied when the produce transfers ownership, that now it's chayiv and meiser. But we say not with the worker. It's not chayiv and meiser just because the worker is eating. Savecha, to your satisfaction, but you're not allowed to overeat, like the fox in the vineyard. The story in the Medrash wanted to get into the vineyard, but the hole was too narrow, so he had to fast for 3 days. He makes it into the vineyard, then he eats for 3 days, and then he can't get out. So he fasts for another 3 days, and then he can get out. Says afterwards, "What did I gain?" So
You gain weight.
well,
Taste of it.
right. Well, kali chalesit, you can't put it into your own utensils, your own basket. Now we have that interesting halacha that you're only allowed to eat at the time of harvest. When you're putting it into the basket of the owner, that's when you're allowed to eat. When you're not putting it into the basket owner, which means it's not the harvest time, then you're not allowed to eat. If you're doing other stuff over there, that's not the finished product, then you're not allowed to eat. Okay.
By the way, I Googled, can you eat raw wheat, raw grains?
Okay.
It's very interesting. It says, because grains evolves to last from season to season, we cannot digest them raw. But it sounds like there may have been a time that one could.
Interesting. Now, when they use the word evolved, are we talking about 300 million years, or are we talking about 2,000 years? I don't hear. I can't hear.
I said, I don't know, Rabbi Google or Professor Google didn't say that.
Yeah, they're not going to give me a real answer there.
Well, only started like harvesting, planting.
Right.
There's something else that says, can you eat raw wheat of the stalk? There is a short interval of a few weeks during which the mature wheat, though still green, is soft and full of starches and proteins. This is the only moment at which wheat can be eaten fresh from the stalk.
Perfect.
There you go.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Very nice.
So it is edible.
It is edible. Yeah. That when it's still green, it sounds like it's still green. Amar Rav Yana. Okay, now we entered into a discussion about when you're obligated to separate meiser. At which point of the production? If you go into the field and you want to take a taste of something, are you allowed to just eat, or do you say no? I have to separate meiser. Yeah, I went to Eretz Yisrael with a guy, and his business was agriculture, so he went to look at fields. So he has fields in Peru. He went to Eretz Yisrael, so I went along with him. So during the day, he went to the fields, and I went to the Beis Medrash or whatever. And then at night, we came back to the hotel. So he had brought grapes and stuff and things from the field. He said, "You got to taste this." So I don't know if I'm allowed to eat it. So I have to take meiser. So I didn't take meiser. I was with the guy who was religious and whatever, the owner of the. So yeah, but you were in the field. Maybe it's different when you bring it into the house. Anyway, I don't know the laws of Eretz Yisrael, so you have to be strict.
So it's
I didn't end up eating it. I didn't know how to separate. I'm sure people in Israel, they know. You take one off, you leave it here, you take another one on. They know what to do. I didn't know what to do.
Meiser's 10%.
You have to separate a tenth.
There's a
Tenth of a tenth.
That's only when there's a sale. It's a gift.
I think any transfer that would be.
If he was
Let's take a look at this.
The owner, does he have to take meiser if he's eating in the field?
In the field, you're fine. In the field, you're allowed to munch on stuff.
Okay, so he keeps punching at home with
That's a problem. Let's take a let's. Eina tevel mischayv meiser ad shir pnei abayis. The produce is not chayav and meiser until it enters into the house. Shenemar, as it says when he's saying the videi meiser, he says biarti akedesh min abayis. He says I have removed all what's holy from the house, which means that when it enters into the house, it gets holy. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yanai. I believe Rabbi Yanai is the teacher of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, do you still have anyone have that chart? Rabbi Yechanan Amar, Rabbi Yechanan says, "Afilu chatzah kevas." He says, no, it doesn't have to be the gateway to the house. It could even be the courtyard. That's also chayiv. It says that you will eat in your gates, and you will be satisfied. Now, that's referring to coming into the gates of the courtyard. Rabbi Yechanan Nami Yaksiv min Abayis. What does Rabbi Yechanan do with Rabbi Yanai's view? He says that it's the house. He has a verse that he's quoting. Amalach. So Rabbi Yechanan would respond. When do we say a courtyard makes you obligated? That's only if it's a courtyard that's guarded similar to the house. So we're learning from the house that the courtyard is guarded. But according to Rabbi Yanai, it says the gates, which would mean a courtyard as well. Why does he say, basically there would be a machlekes here if it came into the courtyard but not into the house. According to Rabbi Yanai, you're still allowed to eat, and according to Rabbi Yechanan, you're not until you separate meiser. So it says, what does Rabbi Yanai do with the gates? It says, even when you bring it into the house, it has to come through the front door. But if you take it through the roof, or if you take it through the chimney, I guess, or karfifas, you bring it over like fences, enclosures, so then you're not going to be obligated. Masav Rav Chanina Chuzah has a question. It says, we learned that just like the owner is allowed to eat in the field, that's what we understood before. We thought it's in the field. Just like the owner is allowed to eat, and he doesn't have to separate meiser, so too the laborer, the worker, is allowed to eat, and he doesn't have to separate meiser. But let's say the guy is not a wet laborer, he's a purchaser, and he's in the field, then chayav, then he would be chayav. 1 second. My love basada. Aren't we talking about in the field? Now, why should he be chayiv in meiser if it's still in the field? He didn't go into the house. He didn't go into the courtyard. Kasha and Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Yechanan. We're talking about where that case is talking about where the fig tree is hanging over into the garden. From the garden, it's hanging over into the courtyard. Okay. And according to the opinion that says that it needs to be in the house, which that was Rabbi Yanai, so it's hanging into the house, sticking into the house, Florida house, right? If it's in the house, so why? Then the balabayas should also be chayiv. Why are you saying only the purchaser is chayiv to take meiser if it's in the house? It says balabayas ain't a. We go after when it comes to the owner, we look at the trunk of the tree. Where's the base of the tree? The base of the tree is not in the house. So we view the whole tree that it's not in the house. When it comes to the purchaser, he's not looking at the trunk of the tree. He's not interested in that. He's looking at his produce. And that is in the house. So each one has their own story over here about where this fruit is from. The owner says, oh, the fruit's from the garden. And the worker says, no, the fruit's from the house, because he is only looking at that detail. But like what we're saying now is that the purchaser is going to be chayev, according to the Torah, to take meiser, and it's only the worker that doesn't have to. But Tanya, 1 second, we have a brisa that says, why was this marketplace of Beis Hinai destroyed 3 years before Yerushalayim? What did they do wrong that that area was destroyed instead of year 70 and 60 in year 67? Because instead of following the rabbis, they followed what it says in the Torah. They used the text, and they didn't accept the rabbis' stringencies. Because they said, you should take the where you have to take the tithe, and you will eat. But not if you're selling it. I guess it means you let the purchaser take the tithe, I guess. Tzivua zaracha, the grain of your seed, the produce of your seed, but not the purchaser. So it turns out that the purchaser does not really have to take the tithe. Rather, what we were talking before, that we said that the purchaser has to tithe, that's just rabbinic. Ukras machta balma, and the verse that we quoted was just a support for that. So then, what do we do with the verse that says that if the owner doesn't have to, is allowed to eat? So what about the lekech? It says lekadetanya. We learned in a brisa that theoretically you can make up with him, and you can say that I don't want you to eat, just like you yourself when you go into the field, you can stop yourself from eating. So to your worker, if you make up an arrangement with him that he shouldn't eat, you pay him a little extra that he shouldn't eat, that's acceptable. Okay, let's leave it over here.